What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we dive into spoilers for Murders of Karlov Manor for the color blue. I previously went over white here on the channel, and we'll be going over the rest of the colors in future videos. With that being said, let's just dive into the video and let's start talking about them. The first card we have up here is going to be Agency Outfitter. It's a 6-mana 4/3 flyer that when it enters the battlefield, we may search our graveyard, hand, library for a card named Magnifying Glass and or a card named Thinking Cap and put them on the battlefield. If we search our library this way, we shuffle our library. So basically what this is it's a card that will get these two specific cards out onto the battlefield, which means if you have open mana, you possibly could equip that immediately to this card, or you just have free equipment that you could equip into a creature like this one or another creature you may have on the next turn. Overall, it's an okay card, I would say, because it's kind of like a 3-for-1 if you are able to get lucky enough in like limited to have all of these. Outside of limited, I don't know if this is going to be a card that's going to see a ton of play. I don't know how effective these equipments are. I haven't gone over them just yet, as I'm seeing a lot of these cards for the first time. So in terms of constructed and anything like Commander, I don't think this will be a card that will see tons of play there. But this will be definitely a card you'll see some play. Worst case scenario, you have a 4/3 flyer that costs 6 for blue. In limited, if you have the Magnifying Glass and or the Thinking Cap, maybe it's an okay-ish card. But overall, it's like a filler card, I would say, if you're looking for something to kind of curve out on in your limited draft or sealed. The next card we have is Behind the Mask. This is a 1-mana instant speed spell that if we cast this spell, we may collect evidence 6, which means we exile cards with total mana value 6 or more from our graveyard as we cast it. Until end of turn, target artifact or creature becomes a artifact creature with base power and toughness of 4/3. If evidence was collected, its base power and toughness is 1/1 instead. So basically what this is early on could be a combat trick to pump up your stuff in like a limited or draft, like to kind of catch your opponent off guard. If you're looking for some sort of way to remove your opponent's creature, maybe you try to trick them into blocking, maybe they block with their big creature, you turn into a 1/1 and you get to kill that creature in the process. Though you do have to remove mana values of 6 or more from your graveyard, which is kind of like the drawback, so you won't be able to really do it at the beginning of the game. But as the game goes on, this will definitely be a card that I think we'll see some play here and there as that kind of combat trick spot removal in blue, where typically blue lacks it. Outside of limited, though, I don't really see this card seeing any real play in any of the other formats like constructed and or commander. But overall, pretty interesting card to have in your limited pool. The next card we have up is going to be Bethnic Criminologist. It's a 5-mana 4/5. When it enters the battlefield and or attacks, we may sacrifice an artifact if we do draw a card. This is kind of like one of those filler cards you would have in your draft and or sealed. It's just kind of like a 5-drop. You know, if you're playing like the clues or detectives, this will be a way to kind of get instant benefit from having clues on the battlefield without having to pay that additional 2. Other than that, you know, it's a decent 4/5 in draft and seal. Doesn't really have any upside benefits. It doesn't have vigilance, doesn't have, you know, flying, anything like that. You know, it is a merfolk, so if you are someone who plays like merfolk, maybe this is a card that finds a spot in like a merfolk deck, but I don't really know if there's a ton of artifacts to really get a benefit of its secondary effect overall. In terms of constructed, I think there's better things you want to do at 5 than with this card. If so, I don't think we'll see play there. But overall, in limited, it's definitely going to be the card you're going to want to play at 5 probably if you're playing clues, just because it gives you that draw effect, which is definitely very beneficial. You know, drawing additional cards in draft and sealed is definitely very good in general. The next card we have up is going to be Bubble Smuggler. It's a 2-mana 2/1, has the disguise effect of 6, which is kind of expensive. If disguise is essentially turn a card face down for 3 mana, and at any point you can flip it up for that 6 mana that it has. Though when it is turned face up, it gets 4+1/+1 counters on it. So initially it's just a 2/1 for 2. Or if you decide to do the disguise thing, you can eventually turn it up for 6 mana, and it then becomes a 6/5, which actually, you know, if you think about it, it's actually not a bad, you know, overall card. The only downside is it really has to live until that point. But I guess if you're really thinking about it, the card has ward initially when it's turned face down, so it is definitely plausible that it will still be around by the time you have 6 mana up to turn it face up. So overall, very unique card. I would say this is going to be one of those cards, depending on the situation. Early game, you may want to get it out, you know, as initial damage. Late game, you know, you draw this card, you probably put it face down initially and then eventually turn it up when you do have the 6 mana, or turn it up the following turn, as I do think in that additional benefit of the 4+1/+1 counters makes it a little bit better. So overall, pretty cool card. It definitely kind of like another interesting card to have in a blue deck for limited and draft. Outside of that, I don't really think this card will be very competitive in like constructed and or commander, so definitely mostly a limited card for the most part. The next card we have is going to be Burden of Proof. This is a 2-mana flash speed enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 as long as it's a detective that we control. Otherwise, it has base power and toughness of 1/1 and can't block detectives. So this is yet again another kind of combat trick blue has to kind of like shrink your opponent's creatures if you need that. And if you're playing the detective archetype, you can definitely buff your detectives at instant speed. Overall, very solid card to have yet again. Blue doesn't really have any good spot removal, so this is kind of our way to kind of have spot removal, but also a combat trick, which is definitely pretty good. And 2 mana seems to be pretty effective at that, and also it being flash, so it's not one of those things that you're going to do on your main phase. You get to do this at instant speed, so you get to choose how you want to react with this spell. Overall, pretty good card. I would say this is definitely something I'd probably put into my deck if I was playing limited or sealed, just because of if I'm just going that direct detective archetype and just having the ability to also have spot removal. The other thing too, when it comes to constructed and commander, I don't really know if there's going to be a detective deck that really forms out of this set, just because so far the detectives seem okay, but nothing that seems really like crazy. But blue and white are the two colors that really have detectives. And then for commander, I don't think there's going to be a detective commander deck. But yet again, I could be proven wrong. But overall, pretty decent card I think for limited and sealed. The next card we have up is going to be Candlestick. This is another one of those cards that refers to the Clue card game that they're coming out with for Magic the Gathering. Overall, it's a 1-mana equipment that equipped creature has +1/+1, and then whenever this creature attacks, it surveils 2, which is actually a pretty good effect in general for an equipment that costs 1. And then the other effect of this card, you could pay 2, sacrifice it, and draw a card, and the equip cost is only 2. Overall, a decent filler card. I think it has decent value, I think, in limited and sealed. In terms of constructed and whatnot, I don't really see people really playing equipments as much as they used to. I don't think this equipment's really that mind-blowing for being a 1-mana uncommon. But overall, it fits the theme. It's part of like the whole Clue multiverse that they're kind of doing with this set. But like I said, it's really just mostly a card that you'll probably play here and there in your limited drafts and or sealed. The next card we have is going to be Case of the Flinch Falcon. Whenever a case enters the battlefield, we investigate, meaning we create a clue token. To solve the case, we control 3 or more artifacts. So it's possible that you play this out, you get that clue, puts you at 3, and then at the end of your turn, you actually solve the case. And then when it is solved, you can pay 3, sacrifice this case, and put 4 +1/+1 counters on target non-artifact. It becomes a 0/0 bird artifact creature with flying in addition to its other types. So basically, it kind of turns maybe your clue token that you may create from this into a 4/4 bird. Which is actually not that bad, with the upside that you can always sacrifice at any point for the effect of drawing a card. For 1 mana, it doesn't seem too bad. It definitely seems like a card you'll probably play in some sort of limited deck. Maybe there's a deck, maybe an artifact that pops up in maybe some sort of constructed format that may want this card. But other than that, I don't really see this seeing some play in constructed and or commander. Next card we have is going to be Cold Case Cracker. It's a 4-mana 3/3 flyer that when it dies, we investigate. It's a very solid filler card, I think, in draft and seal, just because it's a 4-mana 3/3 flyer, which is definitely pretty good. It's evasive, has the upside here. If it dies, you get to get a clue token out of it. So it's definitely another way to find another answer if this ends up leaving the battlefield. In terms of constructed and commander, I don't really think this will see a ton of play, just because 4 mana, I feel like you want to do a bunch of other things, a little bit more powerful things, and this really doesn't seem like it will find a spot there. Even if a detective deck pops up in like standard, I don't really think this will be one of those cards that is an include, just because I don't think this is like the best thing you could do at 4 in that style of deck. Next card up we have is Conspiracy Unraveler. This is a 7-mana 6/6 flyer with the ability of to collect evidence 10 rather than pay the mana cost of spells that we cast. I don't think this card's anything special. I think it's an okay card to open up in your sealed/draft. It's not like a bomb, like, oh, if I play this card, I automatically win the game kind of card in that kind of format. In terms of constructed and commander, I don't think I'd rather be spending 7 mana to kind of get a payoff later kind of thing. I mean, granted, you play this card and then eventually get maybe a card out immediately if you have a graveyard full of things. But yet again, Evidence 10 is kind of expensive. It's not really anything special. It's a lot of mana. It doesn't have hexproof. It only has flying. Nothing really special here. And like I said, even in limited, this is not like something I'm going to go out of my way, maybe pack one, pick one, just because I don't think the card really stands up in that regard. But overall, it's an okay card to just have in your your deck just as a top end type of thing. But, nonetheless, it's just an okay-ish card for the most part. The next card we have is Coveted Falcon. It's a 3-mana 1/4 flying bird. When it enters the battle, whenever it attacks, gain control of target permanent you own but don't control. It has disguise effect, so you can exile it and turn it face up for 2. And whenever it is turned face up, target opponent gains control of any number of target permanents you control. Draw a card for 1. Draw a card for each one that you gain control this way. So basically, this bird is kind of one of those weird kind of cards that you put in like a group hugs commander style deck. You have enchantments that you kind of have, like you have like a 9 lives and you want to give it maybe to your opponent. This is going to be one of those cards that's going to help kind of with that process. I don't know. It's not really a good card, I would say, in general, in other formats outside of like commander that is built around, giving your opponents like bad enchantments, bad cards in general. You get the added benefit here of drawing cards. Other than that, I don't think this is a card I'm going to really put in my, seal deck and draft deck. I'm not going to really build a standard deck, as I don't think there's a standard deck that currently exists that really wants to give your opponents things, as I don't think there's a ton of things that really have a bad side to them if your opponent has them. The only thing I can think of is the 4-drop that's a 6/6 that gets the oil counters that eventually get removed, and if all of them get removed, then you lose the game, but you give it to your opponent, so they lose the game. So other than that, I don't really see this seeing a ton of play like in other formats, maybe outside that group hug style commander deck. The next card up is going to be Crime Stopper Sprite. It's a 3-mana 2/2. As additional cost to cast a spell, you may collect evidence 6. It has flying, which is pretty solid. And when it enters the battlefield, tap target creature. If evidence was collected, put a stun counter on that creature. So basically what this is saying is if you pay for just the 3 mana, don't collect evidence, you're going to get a 2/2 flyer that taps something down maybe for a turn. If in the later game you draw this and you're looking for a way to get some damage through, maybe putting the stun counter or maybe something you can't get rid of immediately is going to be the added benefit here. It is a fairy. It is a dragon, a detective, not a dragon. I don't know. It's an okay-ish card. It's, I think, a filler card in limited. It maybe if you're playing the detective archetype, it's something that you're going to want. Outside of that, I don't think it's going to see play in constructed. Not going to see really any play in commander. But overall, pretty solid card, I would say, just to kind of have at 3 mana in your draft and or sealed. The next card we have is going to be Cryptic Coat. It's a 3-mana artifact that when it enters the battlefield, cloak the top card of our library, meaning we take the top card, we put it face down the battlefield, it becomes a 2/2. And this equipment actually gets attached to it. The added benefit here is a equipped creature gets +1/+0, which is definitely pretty good. And then if that card that we have face down is a creature, at any point we can turn it face up by paying the mana cost of that card, which is definitely not that bad. It's a very unique kind of equipment. It kind of makes an unblockable creature for you, which is definitely not that bad. It also kind of like draws the top card. So let's just say the top card of your library is a land. You put it face down. Now that land is now in theory a 3/2 unblockable with Ward 2. And at any point in the game, you can actually pay 2 mana, return it back to your hand, and kind of redo this effect if you maybe want to try to hit a creature or just get rid of a crappy card off the top of your library. It doesn't have an equip cost, so you can't bounce this around once you play it. So once the creature leaves the battlefield, or maybe you can't like move the equipment to another creature after you attack with said creature. But overall, it's an okay-ish card. It's not really a bomb, but it's an okay-ish card. I wouldn't mind opening up in like my limited just to kind of get some free damage in. It's just another way to get more like evasive damage in without really having your opponent being able to block it. The idea here that you can return at any point if the creature left the battlefield, or maybe for example you want to re-equip it to something else. Makes it pretty useful there because added the benefit if the other creature's on the battlefield, it's still 2/2 with Ward 2, so it's definitely not bad in that regard. Overall, not a bad card. I don't know if this will see any filler spots in like any constructed formats like standard or something like that. Commander, maybe there's going to be a deck that wants something to kind of flip over, maybe something with the skies, or maybe a morph deck wants this kind of card. I don't really know in that regard. It doesn't seem like it's that good, but other than that, I think everything else seems okay about it. And like I said, in limited, this is definitely not a bad card to have just to kind of get that free damage in on your opponent. The next card we have is going to be Curious Inquiry. It's a 1-mana enchant creature aura. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you investigate, meaning that you get a clue token. For 1 mana, this is kind of like Curiosity, but kind of worse. Curiosity, if you deal damage to a player, you get to draw a card. This is kind of like 1 mana, hey, we're going to do this thing, but you're going to have to still invest 2 mana later down the road to actually draw that card that you got out of this. I think the benefit here is going to be getting those artifacts, as there are cards that worry about artifacts or want you to have artifacts. So being able to put this on something that maybe wants to sacrifice an artifact to get another effect is definitely not that bad. We did have 5 mana 4/5 before that, whenever it attacks or enters the battlefield, you sacrifice an artifact and draw a card. If you put a Curious Inquiry on that card, you can actually essentially have infinite artifacts every time that creature attacks, as long as it doesn't die. So every time it deals damage, you'll get an artifact to kind of sacrifice and kind of keep that loop going. Overall, not a bad card. Kind of, not bad for 1 mana. Definitely something I'd probably put in my limited or sealed. I'm not sure if there's going to be an artifact deck that really, wants to generate artifacts overall in like standard. Maybe a deck in Commander may want this card to keep on generating artifacts for only 1 mana, which is definitely not bad. But overall, it's an okay-ish card, mostly a limited card, I would say, in general. The next card up we have is going to be Deduce. This is a 2 mana draw card, Investigate. So basically, you get a clue token and you get a card out of it for 2 mana instant speed. I think this is an okay-ish filler card in Limited and Draft. I don't really see this being a card that fits in any other deck outside of that atmosphere, just because I do think there's better things you want to do for 2 and effects of drawing cards, as I think, like even a card like Impulse, where you get to look at top 4 cards and get to pick a card, is a much better effect. I guess the clue token's okay if clue tokens matter in your deck, but outside of Limited, I think this is just a card you put in your Limited deck just to kind of have a way to dig a little bit deeper and also generate a clue token if you want to make sure you hit your artifacts. But nonetheless, still an okay-ish card. Next card up is going to be Dramatic Accusation. It's a 3-mana enchant creature. When it enters the battlefield, tap enchanted creature. Enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap steps. And then for 2 mana, shuffle enchanted creature into its owner's library. So, it's an okay-ish kind of spot removal spell that blue has. Typically, I think every set has one of these kind of tap something down on your opponent's turn. I don't know if they're always 3 mana, but this is one that is 3 mana. And I guess the upside benefit here is that you can actually shuffle that card into your opponent's library if it has some sort of effect you want to get off the battlefield. For 2 mana, which is okay, but the downside is if you don't have any sort of way to stop your opponent from recasting that card, it's going to come out on the battlefield eventually at some point if the game keeps on going, just because it goes back into the library. It's not really leaving the battlefield, which I do think could be kind of troublesome, I think, in Limited. And then outside the atmosphere, typically there's better things you want to do at 3 mana in Standard and or Commander 4/3 to kind of, lock something down. So basically, this is mostly going to be one of those cards you put in your blue deck in Sealed and or Draft just to kind of, keep control of the battlefield into your favor. Next card we have is going to be Eliminate the Impossible. It's a 2 mana Investigate. Creatures of your opponent's control get -2/-0 at the end of turn, and then if any of them are suspected, they are no longer suspected. Basically, suspected means the creature gains menace. Also means that they can't block. The benefit here is, I guess this can be used as it's mostly a combat trick. It mitigates some damage your opponents may be doing if they go for a big attack. If your opponent thinks, oh, I have some suspected creatures, I can get some free damage in because now they have menace. It makes it hard for you to block. But the benefit here is that you turn off that menace and then basically make their creatures smaller to make them very manageable to block in that regard. Plus, you get a clue token for 2 mana. This is going to be, like I said, mostly a mitigation of a combat trick. Just to mitigate some big damage your opponent may try to do by swinging it real large. I think that, like I said, the upside of this is really the clue token plus the -2/-0. And then if I guess the game has some suspected creatures, making them not suspected anymore is definitely also pretty solid. Overall, pretty good card. Yet again, another combat trick filler card, another weird kind of removal card blue has to kind of get rid of things on the battlefield. In other formats, I don't really think this will see a ton of play just because I feel like there's better things you want to do at 2 mana in Standard and or Sealed. So the next card we have up is going to be Eliminate the Impossible. It's a 2 mana instant speed spell that investigates when we cast it, and then creatures your opponent's control get -2/-0 at the end of turn. And any of them are suspected, they are no longer suspected, meaning that they pretty much lose their ability to have menace, and they also lose the ability to not be able to block, which is definitely kind of a good thing, I would say. I would say it makes the blocks more manageable when you cast a spell. Your opponent may be swinging big, they have a few menace creatures because they're suspected, and then you mitigate them down 2 power, which is definitely makes them easier to block, especially with smaller creatures, and then turns off the menace so you don't have to commit 2 creatures to block that said 1 creature. I think this is mostly kind of like one of those things you just have as that like emergency pull lever kind of things. It's more of going to be a card you're going to see in your Draft and or Sealed as that kind of mitigation effect. Maybe your opponent goes for a big attack, you mitigate most of the damage, and then you swing right back and finish off them. They may try to go for that kind of effect. Other than that, this card's pretty okay. I don't think this will see play in Standard. I don't think this will see play in Commander, but it's definitely one of those cards we'll see some play here and there in your Draft and Sealed pools. Next card we have is going to be Exit Specialist. It's a 2 mana 2/1. It can't be blocked by creatures of power 3 or greater. It has Disguise, which is definitely pretty solid. So you turn it face down for 3, turn it face up at any point for 2. 2 mana, and then when it is turned face up, return another creature to its owner's hand. So basically, it has a bounce effect when it's turned face up. Worst case scenario, you just play this as a 2/1, and then has that a little bit of evasive that only small things can block it. So it makes it a little bit harder for your opponent to really get good blocks on it when they do decide to block it. So overall, pretty cool card. It's nothing really special. It is part of the detective archetype that exists kind of in this set. So if you're kind of doing that thing, maybe this is a card that you definitely want to include. It's definitely going to be a card you're going to put into your sealed and draft deck. You know, it's not going to be like pack one, pick one, but it's definitely going to be there in the pack, and you're probably going to pick it eventually if you're trying to go for those colors or go for that archetype. Its disguise effect is a little bit costly, but yet again, having some additional ways to bounce things and mitigate what your opponent has on the battlefield is always very good. Other than that, it's just a very average card. Probably not going to see any play in any other formats, but definitely not a bad card to have in your limited and or draft pool. The next card we have up is going to be Faith Flight. It's a 2 mana flash enchantment aura, enchanted creature. When enchanted creature enters the battlefield, enchanted creature gains hexproof, and then enchanted creature also has +1/+0 and flying. So basically, this is going to be kind of one of those combat tricks you're going to do, or kind of in response tricks you're going to do in your blue deck. Basically, if your opponent tries to target one of your creatures you may be attacking with, you're going to cast this spell in response. Basically, now giving your creature hexproof so they can't be targeted by a spell. And then the added benefit is the following turn, or after the spell resolves, now your creature is a +1/+0 and also has flying on top of whatever they had already, which makes that creature maybe a little bit more aggressive, being able to attack into your opponent. Definitely a good card. It's definitely gonna be one of those cards you play in your draft and limited, just to kind of have that additional kind of ways to get points of damage in, and also have ways to kind of mitigate what your opponent's trying to do. Outside of that format, I don't really see this card seeing a ton of play, just because unless an enchantment deck that really cares about this type of stuff pops up, I don't think this is a very good card in that regard, as I feel like there's better things I want to do at 2 mana in any other constructed format. But overall, in limited, it's definitely not a bad card to have. The next card we have up here is going to be Forensic Gadgeteer. It's a 3 mana 2/3 that whenever you cast an artifact spell, we investigate. So basically, you play this out, and any future artifact spells that we may cast going forward will create us a clue token in addition to the spell we're casting. And then activated abilities of the artifacts we control cost 1 less to activate, though this effect can cost them to go less than 1, so the minimum is going to be 1 mana. Basically, this card's going to be good for making our clue tokens go from being 2 mana sacrifice to draw a card into 1 mana sacrifice to draw a card. And then if we cast any other equipments, we're going to be able to also pay those equipments for 1 less activated ability, which is overall pretty decent. It's definitely a very interesting card. I could see this seeing a ton of play in the limited format just because there's a bunch of ways to generate clues, and this is going to be one of those cards you want to actually have in your deck to kind of make that cost of the clue to sacrifice 1 less, which is definitely not that bad. In limited or in constructed, I don't know. It's definitely up in the air. I don't, is there an artifact deck that is out there that wants this in there to make your artifacts cost that much less? The next card we have up is going to be Forensic Gadgeteer. It's a 3 mana 2/3 that whenever we cast an artifact spell, we investigate. And then the activated abilities of artifacts we control cost 1 less to activate. This effect can't reduce them less than 1, meaning that the minimum this is going to go down to is 1 mana. This card's going to be kind of one of those cards that's going to be good in your limited deck just because there's a lot of ways to generate tokens. A lot of clue tokens. So basically making your clue tokens instead of costing 2, cost 1, which is definitely be very good. Any equipments that you may add into your deck, this is going to make them cost 1 less to equip on anything, so definitely not bad there. In terms of constructing and commander, it's a card that I would probably include. If I'm an artifact deck in standard, maybe this is a card I include to kind of mess around with, see how good this is in that regard. Making my stuff cost 1 less to activate is definitely not that bad. This works pretty well with the craft ability that came with Ixalan, so definitely a way to make the craft effect cost 1 less, which could be effective. I'm sure clues will be popping up here and there in standard. In commander, yet again, there's a lot of activated abilities of artifacts that you want to do, and this is going to be one of those cards if you're playing blue in any of those artifact decks that you're going to want to include to make those effects cost 1 less, which is definitely not bad. Plus, if you're a very artifact heavy deck, you're going to get a bunch of clues in general, so it's definitely a way to also generate more artifacts if you're also looking for that. Overall, pretty cool card. Definitely kind of high on this one. I do enjoy playing artifact decks in other formats, and like I said, if I open this up in my sealed and draft, I'm not going to be mad about it. I actually will be happy, though it isn't kind of like that bomb that I'm gonna definitely win the game because I have this card in that kind of format. Next card we have is going to be Forensic Researchers, a 3 mana 1/3. We can untap another permanent we control, or we can tap it and collect evidence 3 and tap target creature we don't control. So basically, this is going to be one of those things to maybe get additional effects, maybe untap a creature you control that you attack in with and leave this creature, untap that creature to maybe block, or just untap it in general if they have some sort of tap down effect on them. And the other benefit here is if we have things in the graveyard with mana value 3 or greater, we can always tap this down to tap something our opponents have down by paying that 3 evidence every time. Not going to be something you're going to do all the time, but definitely not a bad card. It's kind of like a very situational card. It itself doesn't really attack very well with it being only a 1/3, and its other effects are okay, but not anything crazy. So I don't really see this being a card that you'll see outside of sealed in that regard, or draft, just because it's just a filler card in that format, and I don't really think this is like I need to play this on turn 3 in any other format kind of card. The next card we have up is going to be Furtive Courier. It's a 3-mana 3/2. It can't be blocked as when we sacrifice an artifact this turn, and then whenever it attacks, we draw a card and discard a card. Basically, its attack effect is like Merfolk Looter's effect. And we have this added benefit here. If we're able to sacrifice a clue, we can then actually give this evasive. This is kind of like that card we saw before. If we put that card on this card, we can keep on generating clue tokens. So every time this would deal damage by being unblockable, we get a clue out of it, which then the following turn we can sacrifice before attacking and give this unblockable. So then it keeps on generating those clue tokens. Plus it would then become a 4/3. So definitely not bad to have in that deck if you have that kind of curiosity kind of card in your deck alongside of this, just because that's kind of like a free way to generate a clue token. Outside of that, I don't really see this seeing a ton of play in Constructed and or Commander, but definitely not a bad card to have just in general in your limited draft or sealed deck that you may be building. Next card we have is going to be Hotshot Investigators. It's 6 mana 4/4. When it enters the battlefield, return up to 1 target creature to its owner's hands. If we controlled it, we investigate. So for 6 mana, it's kind of like a self bounce or to get a clue token. At worst, it's bounce a creature your opponent controls back to their hand to have them recast it. This doesn't have flash, so you can't do it at the end of your opponent's turn. So this is going to be main phase, kind of slow kind of thing. So eventually that card's going to come back out. 6 mana is kind of a lot for this card. I don't really know if this is going to be a card I would want to include in my deck, because I don't really think its effect is that crazy that it's like going to be like I need to have it in the deck. At best, it's probably a filler card in draft and limited in general, and then in any other format, I think there's just better things you want to do for 6 mana, so I don't think we'll see any play outside of that. Other than that, it's just a very, okay-ish card, just an okay-ish common, nothing really crazy about it for 6 mana. The next card we have is going to be Intrude on the Mind. This is a 5-mana instant speed spell that we reveal the top 5 cards of our library, separate them into 2 piles. An opponent chooses one of the piles, put that pile into our hand, the other into our graveyard, and we create a 0/0 artifact creature with flying based on how many cards were put into the graveyard this way. So basically, if your opponent takes your good card, puts it into a small pile, like of 1 or 2 cards, you choose that pile. You then at least get a 3/3, maybe a 4/4, depending on how they decide to separate the piles. At best, maybe even still, you choose the bigger pile that your opponent gives. You still at least get a 2/2 probably, just because if you divide it in half, it's at least a 3/2 separate pile. But yet again, this is actually a pretty cool card. It's kind of like a take on Fact or Fiction for 1 mana. I think this is kind of cool in the fact that you get a Fact or Fiction effect, which like is the separation up, make your opponent make a choice. And on top of that, you get a creature out of it. So in theory, depending on how you choose, you could choose like maybe I want that flyer, so I'll choose a smaller pile just to get a bigger flyer. Is going to be the way that makes your opponent have to really make really good decisions, just because they have to consider like just because they're putting your good card into the smaller pile. Can they also deal with that flyer you're going to get out of it from this card, and it being instant speed, which makes it kind of cool in general. So you do this at the end of your opponent's turn. This is not going to really see a ton of play, I think, immediately in like standard, just because there's better effects I think you want to do to dig into your library to look for cards. But it's definitely going to be one of those cards that eventually, as those things rotate out of the format, I think this will kind of take place of those cards. And then just having ways of generating creatures is always very good. This is definitely include into any of my limited kind of decks that I would be building in blue. And then Commander, yet again, it's another fun card I would probably include, just because I like making my opponents in Commander make these kind of choices. Like I do play Fact or Fiction some of my Commander decks, so I probably would also play this card as like an upgraded version of said Fact or Fiction in those decks. But other than that, it's definitely a cool card. The next card we have up here is going to be Jaded Analyst. It's a 2-mana 3/2 that when we draw our second card each turn, this card will lose Defender and gain Vigilance at end of turn. So basically, it loses Defender, gains Vigilance, becomes a better attacker. This is going to be one of those filler cards you have in your deck when it comes to draft and sealed, just because it's just a 2-mana card. It's not a very good defender, and then the effect here of drawing that second card to turn off Defender is very hard to kind of keep consistent unless you have a good way of generating maybe additional ways to draw clues. Maybe not a bad card to have. Overall, it's not really anything super impressive. It's definitely not going to be a card you're going to see in any other format, just because not many decks want this kind of card at 2 mana. I think there's better cards that would be able to still attack and have a better effect in general. This is not like a very explosive effect to have in your constructed formats like Commander and or Standard. And like I said, this is more of a filler card in sealed or draft for the most part. In like a Standard format, I don't think there's going to be a ton of self-mill decks. And maybe in Commander, there's just another one of those cards to have in your Commander deck just as another, in case of emergency, pull lever to things. If I'm self-milling myself, this is just another card to hit. So, overall, it's not a bad card to have. It's not going to be a card that's going to instantly win the game if you have no cards in your library, but it's definitely going to put a lot of pressure on your opponent to deal with this card in that regard. But overall, it's an okay-ish card. Not really anything super impressive. Maybe we're at best a filler card in your limited just because a 2/5 or 5 isn't anything that great. Its effect, like I said, is okay, but not anything impressive. I don't think that's going to be a case that's going to pop up a lot where your library is going to have 0 cards in it to have this always consistently be a 10/10 when it comes out on the battlefield or at some point during the game in your draft and sealed. And then, like I said, in other formats, maybe this will see some fringe play, but not really a ton of play in general. The next card we have up is going to be Lost in the Maze. It's an X2 blue spell. It's an enchantment with flash. When it enters the battlefield, tap X target creatures. So basically, depending on how much we invest into X, we tap those creatures down, put a stun counter on each of those creatures we don't control, and then tap creatures we control have hexproof. So basically, what this is going to do is at first tap maybe your opponent's things down, maybe in response to something, maybe they go for a big attack, you tap X creatures down before they go to their attack step, and then it gives you your added benefit here that any creature you have that is tapped down, it now has hexproof, so it makes it hard for your opponent to really deal with this. I think it's actually going to be I think this is going to be a pretty good card in general. I think this is a card I'm definitely including in any of my drafts. I think this is a card I'll pick out of a draft and or put it definitely into my deck from sealed. In terms of standard, I do think this is going to see a ton of play in decks that are playing blue and making sure they want to protect their things they're attacking with. They are tapped. Your opponent then can't wander an Emperor creature. So if you're playing like mono blue, like Haughty Jin style deck, this is definitely be a deck card I want to play in that deck because it protects my Haughty Jin when I attack with it. Outside of that, I definitely could see this scene play in Commander just because I do think this is just, in general, at worst, is a 2-mana, giving your things hexproof at flash speed. At best, it's like a tap-down effect to maybe put stun counters on maybe very effective things in like a Commander game. In general, this is definitely a very good card. I think this definitely sees a lot of, this will definitely see a ton of play in formats outside of Limited. But yet again, I guess time will tell. It seems on the surface seems very good, but yet again, things seem one way, but then when it comes to actually playing them, it seems very different. So overall, not a bad card. I'm very high on this card initially, and we'll kind of see how this plays out as the format kind of evolves after the release. Next card we have is going to be Mist Away Spy. It's a 1-mana 1/1 flyer that has the disguise effect of 2. When it is turned face up until end of turn, whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, we investigate. So basically, at worst, it's a 1-mana 1/1 flyer. At best, it is a card we invested 5 mana into. We flip it face up, and then we give it an effect of basically getting us clue tokens whenever things we control attack. I think this is a pretty solid card to have in your detective themed deck. It's not a bad card to have as well, just as a 1-mana 1/1 flyer. Its disguise effect is okay. I don't know how effective disguise will be until I really play it. So basically, it's going to be one of those things like, do I really want to invest the 5 total mana I need to flip this over? Or do I just rather play this for the 1/1, front side and not worry about the disguise effect? That will be the time to tell. It's definitely something I'll play in Limited and in Draft. It's maybe something you'll see some play here in Standard just because, maybe a Merfolk deck wants a 1-drop that gets out on the battlefield to immediately tap down to generate Merfolk tokens. In Commander, maybe this will also be another 1-drop Merfolk. Is it anything special? Not really, but yet again, it's just an effective 1-drop just to get something out on the battlefield very quickly and then put pressure on the battlefield really fast before your opponent maybe has any sort of way to really deal with what you're trying to do overall. Next card we have is going to be Out Cold. It's a 4-mana spell that can't be countered. Tap up to 2 target creatures and put a stun counter on each of them and investigate. So this is a very slow kind of spot removal spell. It's not really removal. It's just a tap down effect. It is 4 mana. It can't be countered, which is definitely not bad. Though we're technically in blue and we're kind of getting through blue, and I haven't really seen a counter spell pop up. So not really a ton of counters in the limited format. So I don't know how effective that first effect will be. And 4 mana is kind of a lot even in limited. So if anything, at best, this is going to be kind of a filler card if you don't have tons of ways of dealing with things on the battlefield. You want to include this as a card to kind of just curve yourself out to maybe having 7 total spells that really deal with things on the battlefield, though it's not really anything special in that regard. And in any other format, this is definitely not a spell you're going to want to play, just because I do think there's better things you can do for 4 mana in the constructed and Commander formats in general. Next card up is going to be Prophet's Edict Memory. It's a 2-mana legendary enchantment that when it enters the battlefield, we draw a card. We have no maximum hand size as long as it's out on the battlefield. And at the beginning of our combat, if we've drawn more than 1 card this turn, we put X+1/+1 counters on target creature we control, or X's number of cards we've drawn this turn -1. So basically, if we are able to draw multiple cards during any of our turns, we are able then to put that many counters -1 onto 1 target creature. The turn that this comes out, this will allow us to essentially put that 1 additional card out on, or that one counter onto something. But the effect here is we're going to definitely want to try to keep on drawing additional cards. If you're kind of in that detective/clue deck in like limited and or sealed, this will definitely not be a bad card to have, just because it will kind of, as long as you can generate additional clues, you'll be able to generate additional +1/+1 counters, that puts more pressure onto the battlefield. In constructed, like standard, I don't know if there's a deck that's really, out there right now that is trying to effectively draw a bunch of cards, but if there is, this would definitely be a card I'd include in there. In Commander, 2 mana, given no maximum hand size, is definitely not that bad. I think this effect is definitely, good in the sense of the X +1/+1 counters. As I do think in Commander, there are many ways to draw additional cards. There are things like Ristic Study, stuff like that in Commander that definitely will take a, added benefit here. And that additional no maximum hand size is always very good to have in general. The next card we have is going to be Projector Inspector. It's a 3 mana 3/2. When it or another detective enters the battlefield under our control, and whenever a detective we control is turned face up, we may draw a card. If we do, discard a card. So basically, this is kind of like the common that is kind of like a Merfolk Looter effect. Whenever it or another detective enters the battlefield, we're going to draw and discard. Or if it's turned face up, we're also going to draw and discard. Overall, not bad. Definitely a good card to have to kind of keep that card draw going if you're playing a deck that is focused on playing additional card draw. Is definitely going to be a card that you're going to want to have there. It's also a detective, so it fits into that archetype as well that we have here in Murders of Karlov Manor. So another good kind of card to have in general, just in that kind of regard. It's definitely not a bad 3-drop filler, though I would say in other formats it probably won't see any sort of play because there's just better things to do at 3. But overall, not a bad card to have, like I said, in your limited and or sealed draft type stuff. The next card we have up here is going to be Reasonable Doubt. It's a 2 mana instant speed spell that counters target spell unless the controller pays 2. This is our first counter spell on this list. Its downside is we have to suspect up to 1 target creature. This could be a downside thing for the most part, just because it gives the creature menace if we target one of our opponent's things. The upside out of that, though, is that creature now can't block going forward, which is not bad. It's an okay 2 mana counter spell. It's not anything super impressive. It's just okay early game. In the late game, it's kind of like a dead card because your opponent may have tons of mana. They can pay the 2, so it makes it kind of ineffective in that regard. So overall, it's an okay-ish card. I don't know if I really would play this card even in my draft and or sealed kind of deck. And then in other formats, I think there's just better counter spells at 2 mana that you could be playing, like Make Disappear is still that much better just because you have the effect of possibly making it be pay for. This is just a very front 2 mana counter target spell unless it pays 2 kind of card. Nothing really crazy there. And then, like I said, not really going to see tons of play in your limited just because I think there's better things you can do at 2 mana. Even in your draft and sealed for this kind of effect. I think there's not really going to be a need for it. The next card we have up is going to be Reenact the Crime. It's a 4 mana instant speed spell that exiles target non-land card in a graveyard that was put there from anywhere this turn. We can copy it, and we can cast the copy without paying its mana cost. This is a very interesting card. I don't know if this will see a ton of play in limited in general because it's very awkward to play, just in the fact that it's not a format where a lot of people are putting things into the graveyard a ton of times, and you're not going to get a way to get a good effect out of this. This may be a way to kind of, if your opponent targets one of your things that is kind of like a bomb, it goes into the graveyard, you cast this, kind of reanimate that card or reanimate a copy of said card. That's kind of the only way I can really see that really being effective. It's not really something I'm going to really be able to pull off a lot of times in your draft and limited, just because, like I said, I feel like if you try to do that, it's going to become very awkward. Maybe in standard, there's going to be a deck that wants this card just because it's going to be a cool way to kind of, maybe take your opponent's like Shieldred or something out of the graveyard if it gets put into there from the battlefield this turn or something like that. In Commander, it's probably another fun card to have if you're looking for just ways to copy your opponent's things and not really play your own things kind of effect. So I would say, if anything, at best, it's probably more of a constructed / Commander card more than a limited card. So it's kind of more of, you got to build a deck around this. You can't really just, open up cards in your sealed and draft and maybe get the best effect out of this. But overall, pretty cool card for what the effect is. 4 mana is okay, though. Like I said, the triple blue makes it very hard to splash other colors alongside of this to really make it playable in a lot of decks of multiple colors. Next card up is going to be Steam Chord Scholar. It's a 3 mana 2/2 flying vigilance weird detective. When it enters the battlefield, we draw 2, then discard 2 cards unless we discard an instant or sorcery card or a creature card with flying. This is actually a very good card. I would say for 3 mana, it's pretty much Thirst for Knowledge kind of effect on a creature, and then you get a creature body out of a Thirst for Knowledge, which is very good because Thirst for Knowledge by itself is a draw 2, discard 2 unless you discard an artifact card. There's other formats, there's other versions of that card, but that's kind of the first one that came off to the top of my head. I definitely would play this card in a bunch of formats. I think this will see play, not just in limited. I think this will see some play in constructed, just because having that ability to just dig a little bit deeper into your library in general is very good. Like in a deck that is playing like Haughty Djinn, this is definitely not a bad card to have on the alongside of Haughty Djinn, just because it's going to allow you to kind of refill your hand back up in a way, and getting a body out of it as well is definitely very good in general. Overall, I'm very high on this card. I think this card's also gonna be very good. I don't know in like a format like Commander if this is gonna see play, just because I don't know if that's a format where you're going to want that kind of effect, but I definitely see this will see playing constructed. I think this will definitely be a card I want to play in my draft and sealed deck if I'm going limited. Overall, pretty cool card just in general for its value for getting a 2/2 creature on top of drawing cards from your library. The next card we have up is going to be Sudden Setback. This is a 4-mana instant speed spell. The owner of target spell or non-land permanent puts that card on top or bottom of the library. So basically, this is kind of like a bounce effect. This is kind of like a counter effect. It's not really a counter spell because the card still kind of exists in the library in one way or the other. But now your opponent has to make the decision: do they want to redraw that card the following turn, or are they going to put that card on the bottom of the library to get a new card off the top of their library? 4 mana is kind of expensive, I would say, but it is definitely one of those effects in blue where blue doesn't have a tons of spot removal that you may want to include this if you do open it up in your draft and or sealed. In other formats like Constructed and or Commander, I don't think this will see play there, but it's not a bad card to include maybe 1 or 2 copies depending on how many you get of this card, just as a way to kind of maybe mitigate what your opponent's trying to do and maybe just lock them from just drawing the same card over and over again. Outside of that, it's an okay card. It's not anything super crazy, super impressive. I would say, if anything, I wish this card was like 1 mana less, maybe 3 mana to do this effect. Would be a much better card in general, but for 4 mana, it makes it hard to play in other formats outside of Limited. After that, we have Surveillance Monitor. It's a 4 mana 3/3. When enters the battlefield, we may collect evidence 4, so we can exile things with 4 or greater converted mana cost. And whenever we collect evidence, we create a 1/1 Thopter artifact creature token with flying. So, for 4 mana, at worst, you get a 3/3 for 4. At best, if you collect evidence alongside of this, you may get a 1/1 flyer. So basically 4 mana, collect evidence as well. You then at least get a 3/3 and a 1/1 that has flying, which is definitely not that bad. That flyer is an artifact, so if you're really trying to play that kind of artifact archetype as well on top of maybe being a detective deck, maybe not bad overall, but overall pretty cool card. Definitely not a bad card, definitely a limited card, really not really another format shiner. Like I said, nothing really has standed out in like a detective style deck that I would want to play in a standard format with like a detective theme. Commander, I don't really know how effective detectives will be. But overall, it's not a bad card to have. I would say, like in your draft and or sealed, that you may open this up and you're kind of on that archetype already. You want to care about artifacts. You want to care about maybe playing detectives. This is just one of those cards you'll play alongside of your other detectives. Next card up is going to be Unauthorized Exit. It's a 2 mana instant speed spell that returns target online permanent to its owner's hand, and you surveil 1. So basically, this is just another bounce effect. With the added benefit here, for 2 mana, we get to also look at the top card of our library and choose to keep that card on top or put it into our graveyard, which is not bad. It's okay. It's just another effect here in blue with like its limited ways of removal, just making your opponent have to recast things, making them have that frustration, have to invest that mana again to maybe recast that expensive spell. Overall, not a bad card, but not anything super crazy. Yet again, it's a filler card, I would say, for the most part, unlimited, and not really going to see play in any other formats outside of that. With that being said, that is going to be the blue spoilers for Murders of Karlov Manor. Overall, I would say this set is shaping up to be pretty good. I will say there are a few cards in here that I'm kind of high on. I can't wait to play them in like more of a standard or constructed format and kind of see how good they are in that regard. But overall, let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Is there any cards that stood out to you in blue, or is there any cards you're excited for? If you like the video, hit that like button. It definitely helps out a lot. Lets me know you like these style of videos. And if you want to actually watch me do these videos live on my stream, I actually stream live now at twitch.tv/thescartv. If you want to check my stream out and watch me live there, I try to do a few nights a week. It kind of keeps me honest and trying to keep the YouTube content going. I'm going to try to keep the schedule going with the live streams and then kind of re-edit the videos down and put them here on YouTube. With that being said, if you like the video, hit that like button. If you're new here, want to know I post new videos like this one here on the channel, hit that subscribe button. But until next time, I will see you in the next video.